Okay, welcome everybody to Zooming in. We're so happy you could join us today. This has become a really fun way to interact with illustrious graduates safely during COVID and to highlight their many accomplishments and contributions. Today we're zooming in with one of our busiest graduates that I know, Betty Franicisco, class of 1998. I was really fortunate to spend a really enjoyable year working with Betty for a full year on women in the law. Betty and Stacy Cowan were my conference co-chairs for Women in the Law. Betty, did you know there was a silent film star with your exact name? When I was researching for today's program, I found that out. I thought that was really interesting. So I'm going to dive into Betty's bio, and it is quite lengthy because Betty has many accomplishments. She's currently general counsel for Compass Working Capital Group, and she is a co-founder of Latina Circle and Amplify Latinx. Betty is an entrepreneur, an angel investor, a business executive, a community leader, and an attorney. She's currently general counsel at Compass Working Capital, where she serves as the organization's chief legal advisor. She has over 20 years of experience advising health and fitness businesses, life sciences, technology, companies in the areas of legal, compliance, risk management, operations, and human resources. Most recently, Betty served as the CEO and founder of Fit Nation Ventures, a business and legal consulting practice focused on advising health and fitness companies, and which launched Reimagine Play, a startup that offers fitness programming for children and families in Greater Boston. She previously served as EVP, General Counsel for Sports Club LA and Reebok Sports Club New York, a fitness brand acquired by Equinox Fitness. She began her legal career as a senior business law associate at Edwards Wildman, one of Boston's largest law firms, representing startups, corporations, and investors. She's also an investor with Pipeline Angels, which we'll get into, a network of new and seasoned women investors creating capital for women social entrepreneurs. She's a dedicated community leader who has been involved with a number of nonprofits and civic organizations. She's the co-founder, as mentioned, of Latina Circle and Amplify Latinx, a Boston-based social venture focused on increasing Latinx civic engagement and leadership representation. She serves on the board of directors of Beth Israel Lahey Health, Roxbury Community College, the YMCA of Greater Boston, the board of corporators for Eastern Bank, and most recently, the Boston Foundation. She's also a member of the investment committee of Boston Impact Initiative Fund and the advisory council of the Capital Network. She obtained her JD from our lovely institution, as well as her MBA and a BA in history from Bard College. Welcome, Betty. It's so nice to be with you today, to get to spend a little time with you.
Thanks so much for having me, Mielle. This is a treat to be with you.
It's a treat for me too. All right, we're diving into our questions. First up is, how are you holding up during COVID? You and Paul.
It's been rough, I would say. I initially thought that given I'm pretty steady and strong, unemotional often, but I think there was a breaking point, right, when we saw George Floyd and how he was killed. And, I'm married to an Afro-Latino. He is Honduran, but he is Black and Latino. My kids are brown. I'm Asian. The Asian American community also has faced significant discrimination due to COVID. And all of it came to a head, really, where, I started to feel fear, right? Fear of going out, fear of being outside, fear for my husband and what could happen to him. There's a realization that no matter how successful you are, your status, you could, look a certain way and be confronted by police and be treated, in the same manner as hundreds and hundreds of, Black men have been treated and criminalized and killed. So that fear really just came crushing over the last couple of weeks, where literally I started to cry at board meetings. And I'm at the point where, look, it's okay, right? I think the nation is feeling pain. people of color, our Black community is feeling deep, deep pain and anger, and we just have to acknowledge it and listen, and work with it, right? So I think have been okay recently, because I've now filled this void, with the pain, anger, with now action. But I would say it's still something we have to deal with, right, individually, but also as a community.
Absolutely. I've asked a couple people this, and I feel like I do want to ask a follow-up question. Like, we're at a turning point. Do you feel this is different?
I personally feel it's different from what I've ever seen. I think, those that have been through also the civil rights movement and other types of turning points may say that, this is similar, but I think this is different for my generation, in that I've never seen this kind of response before, especially from our business and corporate community. The pressure to do something, I call it pressure because it's not, self-regulated. It's externally driven, by the, both COVID crisis, economic crisis, and now the racism virus crisis, I would say, right? So, but I think the response is, intense. It's good because we can keep pushing it, but it has to be sustained, right? It really has to be about a deep commitment to ending systemic racism. So I would say it's different, but we've got to keep it going.
Yeah, it's a long-term project. Tell me where you grew up and what did your family structure look like when you grew up? Where were you?
So I grew up in both New York City and in Puerto Rico. My dad is Chinese and my mom's Puerto Rican. So I call myself a Chino Rican. So I toggled between sort of, the city and the island. And because my parents separated when I was young, so I grew up with my mom. And although I look Asian, identify more as Latina, because I learned that's the culture that I learned. And in Puerto Rico, they call me Chinita. I'm the, the sort of the outsider. And that's kind of been my identity crisis, right? Like, no matter which space I'm in, I'm sort of the outsider, but it's also been a great benefit because I can differentiate. And, so I grew up as a teen in New York, and in a low income household, basically with a single mom. It was her and my brother. And that, environment really was what I think shaped my trajectory, because my mom always said, you're going to get out of this, situation if you get a good education. She didn't know how I would do that. But I got some, I would say, real lucky breaks along the way. I was in a Catholic middle school where literally one of the nuns recognized a talent. She thought I was a good artist, and she said, I want you to create a portfolio. I had no idea what that was. And she, helped me create some art pieces and had me audition at Music and Art, which is sort of the equivalent of, Boston Arts Academy here. It's a specialized, one of the exam schools in New York. And I got into Music and Art, which was the most incredible experience. One, it was a great school, fame school. If you know that from back in the day.
I do. We have a couple grads that graduated from there. It's always so impressive.
That's right. Yeah. So it was, it had everything from drama, dance, arts, instrumental. So it was just a fun school, but it was a really good academic school as well. And that sent me on the path, right, to go to Bard College, which again, no one in my family, right, I was the first to go to college. So that was a huge shift, I would say, for, the trajectory of my mom and my family. It's like literally, as I got to college, then went to law school, business school at Northeastern, and then went to work for a large law firm, literally in a matter of, I don't know, 10 years, right? I would say I broke the cycle of poverty for my family.
Wow.
And that's partly because—
You didn't stop. You went all the way.
I didn't stop. I'm not rich, but, I hope not to be, thinking about like where my next, dinner will come from. And I know many families are in that situation right now. So, part of this is gratitude. It's gratitude from how I grew up, where I came from, and this constant, desire to give back and to teach others how to do this, right? Because so many more like me don't have a role model, don't know how to do it. I don't want to be, I don't want others to be like my mom was. You're gonna go to school, but I don't know how to get you there. Now
Right.
we can tell people how to get there.
Am I, quick aside, am I peeking at your art right now?
You
Speaking of,
are, you
wonderful.
are. Yeah, I've got this.
You have so many talents.
Campaign
Unbelievable.
page. It's
Wow.
my little
So we
hobby.
touched, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's my little hobby now.
Oh, it's more than a hobby. Um, we touched on this slightly, but I wanted to have you delve into it a little bit further. What started your interests in both legal studies and business acumen? And were you always entrepreneurial?
So I don't think I was entrepreneurial, but when I was in college, I got the chance to study for the summer at UT Austin. And one of my professors, Gilbert Cardenas, who was the head of the Latino Studies Center there, was both a professor but an entrepreneur. He actually owned an art gallery. And I remember him telling me, I wanted to study law at that time because I thought I could change the world, right, through policy. And so law was the pathway. But he actually said something to me, which was, you're not going to change the world through law, but you'll change it through business. And I said, why? And at the time, like coming from Bard, super liberal school, right? Like I was an anti-capitalist. And I said, no way. What does that mean? And he said, well, the way you change the world is through building wealth, right? It's through helping others have a better economic situation. And when you're an entrepreneur, you create jobs, you contribute to the economy, you help others succeed. And that's the way you're going to make a real change. And so he had said to me, you should get you should get an MBA. He said, you should get an MBA. And I said, no, I'm going to get a JD. So when I got to Northeastern, I don't know, it was maybe 2-3 days in, there was a sign that said, get your JDMBA.
Wow.
And it clicked because I said, wow, you can get both. I still felt like I wanted to study law because I wanted to be an immigration lawyer at the time. But once I went to business school, it really did transform me. I realized you could drive change also from the economic side. So it just depends on which side you want to be on.
Right. Okay, well, that's good. And he sounds really influential in changing your pathway. He sounds wonderful and was also an artist. So we had a lot in common with him.
Yeah. Well, and he supported artists, right? Because he sold their art.
Oh, like that. Okay, next question is, describe your reasoning for starting Latina Circle and how has it evolved into Amplify Latinx? And how did this come to be? And what does this organization do? Describe that for our audience.
Sure. So back in 2012, I was a general counsel at Millennium Partners at Sports Club LA. And I had another friend who was a lawyer, Anita Roman. She and I would meet up, and she was on the board of the Hispanic Bar Association. And at the time, they were doing a study around, the lack of Latinos in the law, especially women. So it was lack of Latinas in the law. And it was really interesting because I was both in my law firm, one of the few, I think maybe I was the only senior Latina at Millennium as a general counsel. Apparently I was the first Latina general counsel in the state, which is crazy to me that in 2012, that would have been the case. And so it just made me realize there's such an absence of people of color in the law, right? But also in all our professions. I would say there's such a leadership gap and a gap of representation across the board. So she and I wanted to create an environment where lawyers initially, but other women in business could come together and support each other, right? In networking, but also building relationships that could help advance us into more senior positions. So part of the Latina Circle was to bring together women across sectors, mostly Latinas, but there were some African-American women, white women, Asian women. And the idea was to create a network of support and mentorship and championing. So over time, the mantra was lift as you climb. So as we were moving up, we were looking to bring others up with us. And it was around opening doors, right? So if I was asked for recommendations for a board, that was the network I would go to and say, here's 10 women you could recruit from. And that network, which initially started with 60 women, we launched it as a coffee series. Cafecitos was our event. And we had U.S. Attorney Carmen Ortiz, she was the highest ranking Latina at the time, launch this with us. This kind of intimate network grew to over 1,000 women
Oh
over
my
a
goodness.
couple of years, or all organically. And what it made us realize is there is a need for this, right? Women want to support each other, but they also need the network, and this what we call the sisterhood. And around 2016, when we were sort of in that next election, in the last presidential election, we started looking at how do we become more civically engaged? What does civic engagement look like in the Latino community? And at the time, we hosted a conversation about the election, and realized we weren't really political, but we realized at the time, wow, we have power in numbers, but we're not using it. We're not voting, in the Latino community is not voting in the way that it can, given its numbers. We're not participating as much, right, in political leadership. We're underrepresented in our both local, state, legislature, and in Congress. And so, realizing, wow, there is no, I would say, organization doing this work around helping more Latinos get into these positions of power and influence, encouraging the civic engagement, right, which is both voting, but it's also how do we contribute to philanthropy, right? How do we create a more philanthropic generation of leaders? How do we also encourage more of them to go into government and politics?
Right.
So at the time, we realized there's such a need for this, and we had already built this network. We're ready, but now we said we got to include the men.
Yeah.
So we launched Amplify Latinx, which is a movement to build Latino political and economic power in the Commonwealth. And that network, again, it was maybe 1,500, 2,000. Now it's close to 3,500, and we want to get it to 5,000 by the end of the year. And again, our goal is to create more civically engaged leaders. We want to see more of us represented both in boards, commissions, but our government, and also in politics.
You're such a change maker. It really is, like, it gives me goosebumps. So you started all of that. That's unbelievable and good for you. And I think it's wonderful you've included men now. You have to work together, right? I'm all women in the law. 100% is my baby that I've grown for 13, 14 years. But you have to include the men too in order to really sustain change. So good for you. Good for you. Very impressive.
Yeah, and I think I've started to learn a lot about how do you distribute leadership and power, right? So it's not about one person. It's how do we get others engaged and give them opportunities to lead. And part of why I think this Amplify Latinx movement has been so has taken off is because we are trying to really be inclusive about who gets to be at the table. It's not us older, folks. It's really our youngest leaders, our millennials, now our Gen Zs, right? They're doing incredible work. And they should be at those decision-making tables just as much as we should.
Absolutely. We're pivoting a little bit. I want you to talk about your work as general counsel at Compass. Why did you choose Compass, and how did your previous roles prepare you for this one?
So Compass is a nonprofit. We focus on providing financial coaching and savings programs for families with low incomes, and our world is around building assets for low income families as a pathway out of poverty. Again, the mission alignment couldn't be better, given how I grew up, given that I was raised in public housing, and we run a program working with housing authorities called Family Self-Sufficiency, which helps families save through their rent payments. And I always think back, if my mom had this available to her, where would we be, right? So the programs that we participate in and run are really unique, because when you live in public housing or you take supports, you're limited in how much you can make. And what we often don't realize is that our policies perpetuate poverty, right? So it's very difficult for families with low incomes to get themselves out of a cycle of poverty, because the programs meant to help them actually don't allow them to keep building wealth. So why Compass's model is so interesting, because it's really innovative, right? So it's one of the first of its kind programs that allows people to literally save, right, while continuing to have the safety of living in, housing, but also building that nest egg that can help them exit eventually. And a lot of our families, end up saving enough that they can buy homes, they can send their kids to college, or they themselves can go to college and really achieve their financial goals. So that's why I gravitated to that mission so much. The executive director of Compass, Sherry Riva, is amazing. And I wanted to work somewhere where I could actually make a difference for families. So, and the work is around closing the gender wealth gap, but also the racial wealth gap. So the preparation, I would say, it is a nonprofit. It's my first nonprofit. I've always been in business in the corporate sector. And I don't know if that prepared me necessarily. My board service and volunteerism did prepare me a bit, but I would say that there's a need in nonprofits for more of a business lens, right? Because we often think of nonprofits as, they're a little bit less structured, or they have, just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean you can't make profit. And so having a business lens is really important. And I have found that that's been my contribution and value, right, to being in a nonprofit, that I can think differently and push an organization to continue to be really innovative, but also drive revenue so it can sustain itself.
It sounds wonderful and right up your alley. I'm so glad that you found your spot there and they found you. We touched on this a minute ago, but how can we increase diversity in the legal and business worlds, especially in board settings? Like, what's the nitty gritty of that? How can we make that happen?
I mean, we've been at it for years. I don't think a lot has changed, from when I was in a firm to now. It's beginning to, because I think it's being pushed by our corporate sector, right? So I think that in the law, the buyers, right, of legal services, which are the general counsels, it's businesses, right, that are consuming legal services, especially our law firms, right? They're the most undiverse settings that you can think of. And there's got to be a intentional, sustained, aggressive, even more aggressive push, right, to diversify the legal profession. I mean, it is one of, it's antithetical to think like this is a profession that is about justice, right? And it's about helping to alleviate inequality, and yet it is non-diverse, right? It has for years perpetuated systems and practices that create and divide our communities. So I think it's a realization of how the role that the legal system has played, right, in our society, but it's also then creating a real commitment to changing the structure. And that's, looking at pipeline, creating more pipeline. I would say there's so many more people now going into the legal profession than ever before. That are diverse, and we have to think about how do we continue creating those role models and mentors so that more of them will go into the profession. So that's sort of our pipeline, creation, and then it's inviting and creating environments in our workplaces that allow people of color, lawyers of color, to thrive. When I first started practicing law, I went into Palmer and Dodge. It was Palmer and Dodge at the time, and I went there because there was an African-American lawyer that I saw myself, and I said, if she's there, I want to be there because I want to learn from her. So if we have more people that look like us, right, we can then create those environments that allow us to thrive. But if you have no one, and there doesn't seem to even be a commitment to wanting you there, and you're just a number, it's never going to work. So I think that the legal profession has just a lot of introspection to do and figure out how does it become literally anti-racist, and that involves a real intentional effort. I don't think it's done that yet.
Yeah, I would agree, but you're doing your part. Mentoring, starting the pipelines, looking for opportunities for people, and that's been incredibly helpful. During COVID, what are you working on for people of color and women of color to enhance their current businesses and to make sure that they survive and thrive in COVID and post-COVID?
Yeah, so through both at Compass and through Amplify, I've done some work around helping businesses get access to what we call the Paycheck Protection Program loans. So in doing that work, we're part of this coalition called the PPP Equitable Access Initiative, which launched in round 2 of the stimulus bill, because at the time we realized, or the country realized, right, that small businesses, especially businesses owned by people of color, were not getting access to this critical funding, right? Especially the businesses that were literally closed. They just couldn't operate because of the stay-at-home mandates. So I focused more on the businesses owned by Spanish-speaking entrepreneurs. And I will tell you, doing that work, I came to realize I didn't think it was, the access was difficult, but I realized that these programs that were created were not for the mainstream businesses. So many of the entrepreneurs I counseled were sole proprietors, had no employees. They had employees, they were structured as independent contractors, so they were not in a position to get access to this federal funding. And that's why you hear in the news day in and day out how PPP loans, this massive stimulus program, did not reach the businesses that were most in need, which were the smallest businesses. I mean, in Massachusetts, 90% of our businesses are micro businesses, right? They make under 250 in annual revenue, under 5 employees. These loans are not reaching them because of the way the program's structured. So it tells you a lot about who's structuring these, stimulus programs, and who are they intended to benefit. It's not those that are most in need, right? So we continue to do the work around helping businesses access funding right now as we go into the reopening of the economy. And then ultimately recovery, businesses need a lot more support. So it's not just capital. Many of them realize that need supports around systems, around technology change. We've all had to pivot. Like, look at how we're operating right now. We're online, right? A lot of businesses were not set up to do that. So helping them pivot and access resources that they never had to before is part of the work of helping them survive right now. And also doing it in a way that's culturally competent, right? So language access is really important. So these entrepreneurs, English is not their first language. So being able to deliver technical assistance in the language, but also by someone that understands what they're going through as entrepreneurs of color is really, really important. So I would say there's lots of opportunity for individuals that have business backgrounds and want to give back.
That's great. It's important work. You recently organized a silent protest. Describe what you were hoping to accomplish, and do you feel like it did accomplish what you supposed to do?
Yeah, so a friend of mine, Anna Foster, she and I are involved with a group. It's actually originated from the men's dinner group, which my husband hosts with Anna's husband, and they did a silent protest a few weeks ago, which was again, to honor and recognize the death of George Floyd, but to recognize the countless men and women, right, that have been subjected to police brutality and criminalization. So we were pushed to do one for women because the women also want to convene and come together, and we wanted to do it both as an act of solidarity, but also as a call for action. So we hosted this silent protest this past Saturday at Faneuil Hall, which was symbolic in terms of where it was. We social distanced, so we were following good safety practices. But we stood there, with signs of someone that had been, killed. And it was really hot that day too. Part of what was important was, you're standing there, and you're recognizing, we did it for about 90 minutes. So you're recognizing this symbolic gesture of, the time that George Floyd, right, was pinned down, which is about 9 seconds. But this was almost an hour and a half, and it's uncomfortable, it's hot, and we just wanted to acknowledge that this is what, this person faced in their death. And so, really important for us to come together as women and recognize that, but also not that to say that's just not enough, right? Right now, you can see that there's just great energy, right, to do something. And as women, I think we're very called, right, to do something. But what is that something? And we're all doing different things in our communities and in our companies. So part of the coming together was also to call upon each other to take some action. So for me, I mean, I'm acting in many different ways, both through supporting businesses, activating our Latino community, supporting families through our work at Compass. But I think we have to go beyond that, right? So right now, we've got to really look at how do we dismantle racism? How do we become an anti-racist society? And that involves a lot of listening, right? Being a good ally to our Black brothers and sisters, but also to think of, where do we want to play a role in our individual lives and in our whole community? What's the role we will individually play in breaking down systemic racism? And I've done a lot of thinking about that, right? There's many things we can do, and what this act of solidarity showed us is that we actually need to work together. We need to work in coalition. We need to work collaboratively, because the path has already been set, right, by our civil rights movement and by this current movement. And the best thing we can do is come together and build more capacity, right, for Black Lives Matter, but also a lot of the other movements around breaking down inequality.
Well, I thought it was really powerful. And there's something about it being silent that also just really was moving. So great job organizing that. Will you talk about angel investing a little bit now? And are there any new opportunities that you're seeing for investments?
There's always good opportunities. Although we are in an economic crisis, there's some great innovations happening. Some businesses are doing really well. I would say, I mean, I just reinvested in some of our companies I had in the past. So I joined Pipeline Angels, which is actually a training program for women to learn how to become angel investors so that they will in turn create more capital for women entrepreneurs. And because I did that program, I have this particular focus on investing in women and women of color. So I've actually not invested in any businesses owned by men. And I've made that commitment early on. But
is it local, Betty, or is it national?
Pipeline is national. So everyone, yeah. And actually they've also launched in Puerto Rico, which does not have really an angel investing community. So it's more banking, a banking culture. So Pipeline launched there, I think it was last year, and after Hurricane Maria. So part of, I guess we call it the investment thesis, right? My focus is really more around companies that are either trying to solve a problem around diversity or health. I'm super passionate about the fitness industry, as you know, from my past work at Sports Club. So I've invested in things like some fintech, some ed tech. There's also some funds that are what we call learning funds, which were launched by Portfolio. and they are both at what we call enterprise funds. They invest in SaaS types of companies, but they've also have a fund called the Fem Fund, right, which invests in fem technology. Everything from things related to women, and then there's also the Rising America Fund that they launched, which is investing in companies owned by people of color. So those are also funds that allow you to invest as an angel, but you get the benefit of learning from them, and there's an investment committee that's making the decisions. So angel investing, because it's an individual sport, right? It takes time, so you've got to be willing to do the work around due diligence and sourcing companies. But I have found that right now there are some great opportunities, right, around supporting like online technologies, education technologies are big right now, transportation, logistics, just because of the way the economy has been closed. So if you're looking, there's some real opportunities, and I would say the best opportunities right now are actually investing in diverse founders, right? Because they've been overlooked demographic. It's been really hard for entrepreneurs of color to raise money. And now if you start to look, you'll realize they have amazing companies and they're doing well. But no one, really looked to invest in them before. So now it's really the time to double down and look at opportunities that others have passed up.
Wonderful. So you got a JDMBA. Did you alternate co-ops in law and business? Explain how that worked a little bit and what your Northeastern background has meant to you.
So I did. So the JDMBA is 4 years, right? So I did my first law school year, and I think I did the full year and then did the first co-op. So my first co-op was actually in Delaware. It was a fellowship that had me working both in a company and in a law firm. And that because Delaware was looking to increase diversity in their legal profession. So they were importing talent. It's just an interesting program. But it was really fun. I got to work at DuPont. And in one of the, the famous Delaware law firms that does a lot of incorporations. And then the rest of my co-ops were law firms and a company. So one was Palmer & Dodge, where I ended up working at, and Gillette was another. So, the JDMBA, I would say, I credit it to changing my life, honestly. Because again, when I went to law school, I wanted to be an immigration lawyer. It was not going to be, I think a trajectory that was going to help me actually build some wealth, right? So going into the business side and going into a firm, which was an anathema, right? And Northeastern, right? The folks that went into private practice or law firms were not looked upon kindly. But I felt like
that has shifted greatly, just so you know. That's really shifted.
Yeah.
We have a lot of corporate attorneys these days.
That's good. That's good. I mean, I for me, it was life-changing because I got to, go into a firm, which was a really, what we call a good career building job, and was able to save and buy a condo, right. And build some equity. There's a lot of lawyers that go into the profession and are struggling. And that was not my experience. I was able to actually do okay for myself. So I would say that the JDMBA one created more opportunities for me to even get the job in a firm. Because again, people of color don't often get those firm opportunities, right? So that was one. It made me more marketable. But it also, in the firm, it created just a different way of thinking, right? Because a lot of lawyers, I see it now, they don't have a business mindset. Right. So what the MBA helped me do was understand business, understand financials, understand how the economy works. And then when you're working with a client, you understand their business a bit more. You actually want to read their financials. You want to understand, like, how do they make money and what drives their products and services. So that, I think, lawyers, when they don't have that. You don't need the JDMBA, so you don't need the MBA, right? But you do need a business mindset, especially if you're working with business clients.
Absolutely. And did you move to Boston for law school and the business opportunity as well? Or
I
were
did.
you already in Boston?
No, I came to Northeastern. Yeah.
Yep. We're
From
so,
New York.
we're
From New
so
York.
glad.
Yeah. And I tell you, Mielle, I didn't want to stay here. When I got to Northeastern, uh, Boston was different. It was a very different city. It was not eclectic as it is now, or as diverse in the city. But I mean, Boston is a diverse city, but it's segregated, and that's what I saw. So coming from New York, which is, diversity is everywhere. It has its own issues, but you walk down the street, you see you see an international crowd. It was not the case here. So on the weekends, I go back to New York, right, to get my hair cut or to just get the food and the places here where you could even get cultural, types of food. I was told, don't go there. They're dangerous, right? So over time, Boston's changed, and that's
Well,
partly why I stay here.
you stayed and you became a change maker, and you're now one of the 100 most influential people in Boston. So it's good that we reeled you in for law school and your JDMBA. Now look what you've done with your time here and all of your hard work, as well as your husband. You're both incredible change makers here. Last question, and we've talked about this, you and I have previously, because I've known you for almost 20 years now.
I know.
We've talked about sharing our platforms to empower others. I often highlight women of color at the Women in the Law conference. I select women of color as my conference co-chairs to give them a seat at the table there. We nominate women of color for awards and things along those lines. Discuss that a bit. How do you or we share the power and the privilege? And we'll end on this positive note, I think.
Great. So once we gain some privilege and influence, it's incumbent on us to use it to open doors for others. So that is what I try to do every day. So I have this mantra where I live my life as if every day were my last day. And that's why I stay up till 1 a.m, making introductions, sending emails to help somebody else. I think that, when we have privilege and we don't use it, that's so detrimental to our culture and society. So I fundamentally believe that, every single day we've got to do something to create opportunities for others. And the way that looks, it's little things, right? So it doesn't have to be this grandiose like plan that we have or that we're doing something that's in the news, right? It's literally buy from a business owned by a woman or a person of color, open a door for them, right? Help them access a new customer or maybe a big contract, right? That could be life-changing for them. It's someone that's looking for a job, right? Maybe you're just giving them advice, you're helping them think through their career strategy, but you're making introductions, right? That will help them get to another opportunity. It's helping our young people, right? To think about, you may just be a role model for them, but to help them see in themselves that they can aspire to be something bigger. A lot of our young people, because they don't have role models, don't see that there's so many opportunities in this world. I never thought I was going to be a lawyer. In fact, there was no such thing in my family, right? But the fact that someone planted a seed and said, you can do that because this is how policy gets made, is through law, was again life-changing for me. So I think there's so many ways that we can open doors. And I think once we are in a company or corporation, a setting where we now have responsibility, right, for hiring, for setting strategy, we've got to bring ourselves fully to the table and speak out, right, about what is not right. So that might include, creating diversity strategies so that our corporate and work cultures can be diverse in places where people of color can thrive. It's also looking at, what is the power structure. So right now we've got to figure out, how do we redistribute leadership and capital, right? So we've got to shift the balance of power and money. And it's folks like you and me that are going to be part of doing that every day, but it's also bringing allies into it, right? So our white men that are leading all these organizations are now saying to themselves, wow, I've got to change and I've got to help our companies change. And we've been doing it for years, right? So providing that path, right, and opening those doors is really, really critical at this time. And I think anybody can do it. Even my kids, like I tell them, like, you can be a mentor to a younger person, and I see that now, right? They play music. They're mentoring younger kids, like 5-year-olds. But those
Absolutely.
5-year-olds are seeing them and saying, I can do that too. So the mentoring and the role modeling starts at the most earliest of ages. And once you build up that, the ability to do it, right, it becomes second nature. The last thing I'll say is, we talk about mentorship a lot, but the championing is what really matters, right? So in a company, for example, in a workplace, it's helping others move up, right? So we know that in many places, women, people of color, don't get opportunities to advance. They're overlooked, right? And we often think we just have to work harder. If we work really, really hard,
Yeah.
don't notice us. And that's not the case. It takes political capital, right, in a workplace to get yourself known and to move up. But it also takes the championing, right? It takes two sides. So the best thing we can do is be champions for others, right? To say, I'm going to nominate you to be at this, on this board, or have a seat at this table. And we're doing it now, right, in coalition with so many organizations. In fact, when other organizations see that there's no representation, they're starting to call it out and saying, invite someone from Amplify Latinx to be at this table. We're saying invite someone from, NAACP or BECMA to be at this table, because we're not seeing Black leaders represented, or Latinos or Asians. So we've got to do that calling out, right? And that's part of championing and using our influence to change the trajectory.
Perfect. I mean, I know Northeastern Law has a lot of champions out there. We've seen them, you and I have. We have the Attorney General. We have the Massachusetts Senate President. We have Rachel Rollins. We have so many people who are champions and doing the really hard work. You in particular have impressed me over the years. You've done so much for our students. For a number of students and people that are coming up with you and behind you. And I know you pull people into organizations and on panels and find representation from people of all colors. And I just want to thank you for that. You've been such a friend to the law school, and to me in particular, but also to the law school. And you've stepped up almost every time I've ever asked you to participate and be a voice. So thank you for all you do, Betty. You're doing wonderful, wonderful work, and you're doing great things with your time, with your degrees. So thank you for spending time with us and sharing your thoughts today. And it's always a pleasure to get time with you.
Yeah, you're the ultimate champion. I say that because you open so many doors, but you give visibility to so many people, and I appreciate you. Thank you.
Appreciate you right back. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for spending time with us today. Thanks for zooming in.
Take care. It's great to be with you.